At the corner of Elm Street sat a bustling convenience store called Market Stop, where locals could grab just about anything they needed. It was a popular spot, especially during the afternoons when people dropped by for quick errands. On this particular day, Officer Alan Tucker, a veteran cop with the Fairview Police Department, was wrapping up his patrol in the store's parking lot. Feeling parched after a long shift, he decided to step inside for a bottle of water. As Alan wandered through the aisles, his eyes were drawn to a woman browsing the shelves. She was a middle-aged woman, casually dressed in a flowy top and jeans. Her attention focused on the selection of canned goods. Her name was Diane Porter, a longtime resident of Fairview. Diane was known for being soft-spoken and kind, often keeping to herself as she went about her daily routine. On this day, she had stopped by Market Stop to pick up a few essentials for her family. Since she only planned to grab a couple of items, she hadn't bothered with a basket or cart. As Diane moved from one aisle to the next, Alan couldn't help but notice her. She was holding a small jar of jam in her hand, and something about her casual demeanor sparked suspicion in his mind. He watched as she picked up a loaf of bread with her free hand. Alan's instincts, shaped by years of dealing with troublemakers, made him jump to conclusions. Could she be stealing? He wondered. Determined to investigate, he decided to approach her. Diane paused near the end of the aisle, scanning the shelves for one last item. Alan stepped closer, clearing his throat loudly as he stopped a few feet away. His sudden presence startled her. "Ma'am," he said in a firm voice, "what exactly are you doing here?" Diane looked at him, confused by his tone. "I'm just shopping," she replied, holding up the items in her hands as if to show there was nothing to hide. Alan frowned. "No cart, no basket. Just walking around with things in your hands. That's a bit unusual, don't you think?" His words were loaded with accusation, though he tried to keep his expression neutral. Diane raised an eyebrow, taken aback by his assumption. "I didn't grab a cart because I'm only picking up a couple of things," she said calmly. "I'm heading to the register as soon as I'm done." Alan didn't look convinced. "Right," he said skeptically. "That's what people always say. But I've been doing this job long enough to know when someone's up to no good." Diane's patience was beginning to wear thin, but she kept her voice steady. "Officer, if you think I'm stealing, you're wrong. I'd be happy to pay right now if it'll ease your mind." Alan crossed his arms, his gaze narrowing. "Hand over the items," he demanded. "I'll decide what happens next." Feeling cornered, Diane glanced around the store. Other shoppers had started to notice the exchange, their curious eyes making her feel exposed. She held out the jar of jam and the loaf of bread, placing them deliberately in Alan's hands. At that moment, a store employee named Rick approached. He was a friendly young man who often worked the afternoon shift. Sensing the tension, he hesitated before speaking. "Is everything okay here?" he asked, glancing between Alan and Diane. Alan barely acknowledged him. "I'm handling it," he said curtly. "This customer might be trying to leave without paying." Rick frowned, recognizing Diane immediately. "I don't think that's right," he said cautiously. "She's a regular here, always polite. I've never seen her cause trouble." Alan shot Rick a look of irritation. "I'm not asking for your opinion," he said sharply. "Go back to your work." Rick stepped back but lingered nearby, clearly concerned. Diane, meanwhile, stood quietly, her composure unshaken. "Officer, I think you're misunderstanding the situation," she said calmly. Alan waved her off. "Misunderstanding? The only mistake here is thinking you could walk out without paying." Diane sighed, frustration bubbling beneath her calm exterior. "If you'll allow me," she said evenly, "I'd like to pay for these now and end this unnecessary scene." Alan hesitated, as if weighing her words. The other shoppers continued to watch, some whispering among themselves. Rick, still standing nearby, spoke up again. "Maybe we should just let her check out, officer. It'd clear things up." Alan scowled but stepped aside begrudgingly. Diane walked to the checkout counter, placed her items on the conveyor belt, and paid in full. As she received her receipt, she turned to Alan, her expression calm but firm. "I hope this clears up your doubts, officer." Alan didn't respond, his face tight with discomfort. He muttered something under his breath and walked out of the store. Diane, now free from his scrutiny, thanked Rick for his support and left the store with her head held high. As the doors closed behind her, Alan stood by his patrol car, his thoughts swirling. It was a small incident, but one he couldn't shake. Unbeknownst to him, this encounter would spark conversations in the town about assumptions, respect, and the fine line between vigilance and bias. At the market stop checkout area, Alan barked, "Let's go to the front," gripping the jam and loaf of bread he had taken from Diane. Diane nodded calmly and walked alongside him. Her demeanor remained composed, though her mind raced with thoughts about the unfolding situation. Shoppers stepped aside, whispering to one another. Some looked concerned, while others seemed curious, their gazes following the pair as they made their way forward. At the front of the store, Alan waved over the store's security officer, a young man named Malik who had worked at Market Stop for years. "Got a thief here," Alan announced loudly, his voice carrying across the checkout area. "Caught her red-handed." Malik looked between Alan and Diane, his brow furrowing in confusion. "Officer, I've seen this lady here plenty of times. She's always been a regular customer. Never any trouble," Malik said, his tone cautious but firm. Alan scoffed. "Doesn't matter what you think. I saw her walking around with these items and no cart, no basket, and no intention to pay. That's theft." Malik hesitated, sensing the tension. "Maybe we should check the security footage just to confirm," he offered. Alan shook his head dismissively. "There's no need for that. I know what I saw." At that moment, Diane spoke up, her voice measured and calm. "I agree with Malik. Let's review the footage. I'd like everyone to see what really happened," she said, her steady gaze meeting Alan's. Alan glared but didn't back down. "Fine," he said through gritted teeth. "Let's settle this once and for all." With Malik leading the way, they all headed to the back room where the store's security footage was stored. A few onlookers trailed behind, their curiosity piqued. Diane remained composed, while Alan's rigid stance betrayed his growing unease. In the security room, Malik pulled up the relevant footage. The video showed Diane moving methodically down the aisles, browsing the shelves and selecting a couple of items. There was no sign of her hiding anything or attempting to leave without paying. "See?" Diane said softly, gesturing toward the screen. "Just a normal shopping trip." Malik glanced at Alan, waiting for him to respond. Alan's face flushed as he watched the footage. He shifted uncomfortably, but doubled down. "That doesn't mean she didn't plan to take something later," he muttered. "We should do a search." Diane's calm expression hardened slightly. Reaching into her pocket, she pulled out a small badge and held it up for everyone to see. "Officer Tucker, let me introduce myself properly. I'm Lieutenant Diane Porter, with the Fairview Sheriff's Office." Alan froze. His eyes widened as he processed her words. The room fell silent, the weight of the revelation settling on everyone present. Malik's jaw dropped. "Lieutenant Porter? Wow, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize," he stammered, clearly shocked. Diane gave Malik a reassuring nod. "You've done nothing wrong, Malik. You've been professional and respectful throughout this," she said. Turning her gaze back to Alan, her tone grew sharper. "But I can't say the same for you, Officer Tucker. Your assumptions and actions today were not just reckless. They were disgraceful." Alan opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His confidence crumbled as the reality of his misstep hit him. I didn't know," he finally managed. "I didn't mean—" "You didn't mean to what?" Diane interrupted, her voice steady but cutting. "Didn't mean to humiliate me? Didn't mean to assume the worst without evidence? This is exactly the kind of behavior that undermines public trust in law enforcement." Malik, still stunned, quickly stepped in to diffuse the tension. "Lieutenant Porter, is there anything I can do to help make this right?" Diane looked at Malik with a small smile. "Thank you, Malik, but I've got this handled." As they left the security room, the murmurs among the remaining onlookers grew louder. Alan trailed behind, visibly shaken. Diane stopped at the exit and turned to him. "This incident is far from over," she said quietly but firmly. "Expect to hear from me again soon." Over the next few days, the fallout from the incident was swift. Alan was called into his supervisor's office, where he was reprimanded for his actions. The video footage, along with Diane's formal complaint, made it clear that Alan's conduct was unprofessional and unjustified. He was suspended pending further review, a decision that sent shockwaves through the department. Meanwhile, Diane received support from members of the community, including a heartfelt apology from Malik. "Thank you for standing up for yourself, and for others who might not have the voice or position to do so," he wrote in a note. The story didn't just fade away. It sparked important conversations in Fairview about bias, accountability, and the importance of treating everyone with dignity. For Diane, it was a reminder of why she had joined law enforcement in the first place, to uphold justice, even when it meant calling out one of her own. For Alan, it was a hard-earned lesson about the consequences of rushing to judgment. The community moved forward a little wiser and more aware, with the hope that incidents like this could lead to meaningful change.